Okay, give me just a minute to get things pulled up. And all right. Welcome everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you all found the link to the video okay and that you can watch this without any problems. If not, let me know. Welcome to my home office. You got me and my usual cup of coffee. I'm going to keep that tradition going. You actually also have my sidekick, the tarantula Pete, back there too. You might see him at some point come out from behind those leaves. Maybe not, though. He doesn't like to be very active in the day, but if you're looking for a little bit of excitement in this video, that'll be something to watch out for. So, as I said in the email, the message that I sent out to all of you guys, this is the way that to me seemed to be the most flexible and hassle-free for you guys, a way of continuing on with our class this semester. If not, we can definitely work out something different. Just get a hold of me, let me know. So this week and next week will be kind of our trial week to see how things go as our extended spring break comes to an end. Each Monday, I'm planning to have a lecture uploaded to Blackboard like this one, and there will be questions with the link to the video for you guys to respond to. There'll either be questions about the lecture in general, or there'll be questions that are more reflective in nature. Again, kind of mimicking the writer's diary, writer's journal assignments that we've been doing in class up until this point. So, it's been a while since we've talked last, and I wanted to kick things off by doing sort of a recap of what we talked about in the last week before spring break. We introduced Project 3 on that day, which I'm super thankful that we did, because now you've had an extra long time to think about maybe what you want to do with Project 3, what you want to write about. The rhetorical analysis of a text, if you weren't there on that last day, that's what Project 3 is. And I do recommend you guys going under the assignments tab on Blackboard, pulling that assignment up and reading through it again carefully if you weren't there and you don't know what I'm talking about, but hopefully you were. But in any case, I do want to just kind of recap Project 3 for you because it's been a while since we've talked about it. So I have the assignment description and guidelines pulled up on my screen too. And yeah, so if you're wanting to think of a way to envision Project 3 in its most basic terms, you're going to want to think about what you did with Project 2 with the media analysis. Remember that you selected a piece of media, whether it be a commercial, a clip from a film, a music video, a movie poster, anything like that, and you sort of broke down the elements of that media and figured out how the creator of that content was trying to make their point. Maybe they were making an argument to persuade their audience to feel a certain way or to do something, or maybe they were trying to sell you something. We looked at a lot of examples where the commercials are trying to get you to buy something, so they have a pitch. Either way, you did your media analysis on how that media was making its argument by breaking it down, looking not just at the mechanics of it, not just at like the background images, music, whatever, but also at the rhetorical appeals too, logos, pathos, and ethos. So Project 3, you're doing the same thing, only this time instead of doing it with a piece of media, instead of a commercial, a film clip, whatever, you're doing it with a written text. You're breaking down that text, an argumentative text. It's got to be one that's making an argument of some sort, and you're seeing how the author makes that argument. What rhetorical strategies are they using? How do they organize things to get their point across? So, going back through the description and guidelines of the assignment, some of the things you're going to want to make sure that you include in this project when you turn it in are, again, with the media analysis, identifiers such as the text's name, the text's author, and when it was published and where it first appeared. So context. imagine that the person that's reading your writing isn't a part of our class, has never heard of you or our subject before. They just picked up this essay and started reading it. You would want that complete stranger to our situation to be able to follow along with your essay, to know that you're actually analyzing somebody else's argument, to know what that argument is, where it first appeared, whatever. So that way it flows smoothly. You're also going to want to make sure that fairly early on in this assignment, you identify what the main idea or the thesis is of the essay or article that you choose to analyze. That's kind of the main point of the whole author's reason for writing, so you want to get that out there as early as possible. Again, imagining an audience that knows nothing about the assignment, you want to make sure that they could follow along themselves. You're also going to want to identify which of the rhetorical appeals the author is using to make their point. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about rhetorical appeals in a minute. That's kind of going to be one of the things we focus on in today's lecture. But just real quickly, don't think that every essay or every article is utilizing all three of the rhetorical appeals. In the past, I've had students turn in assignments where they kind of tried to really make an essay have, for example, a pathos-based appeal when there wasn't one there, but they thought that they had to have one of each of the three, so they just kind of made something up. Not every argument utilizes all three rhetorical appeals, although the good ones usually do. The best arguments aren't just using logos, pathos, or ethos in isolation. It's when they bring them all together that it makes a really persuasive, really powerful, argumentative work. And again, we'll talk about that in a minute. Since this is an analysis, you also want to make sure that you're using evidence from the text that you're analyzing to support the argument that you're making about that text. You don't just make unfounded claims like the author wasn't clear here, the author was confusing, the reader can't follow along. It's okay to say that, as long as with saying that you provide evidence of the points in the essay where that claim is true. So you want to have direct quotes, and this assignment's asking you to use at least 3 direct quotes from the text to support either the author's main idea or a point that you're trying to make about the assignment. So it can be either one. You also want to have a brief discussion about the relationship between the writer and their audience, sort of the kairos appeal. Who is the audience? Are they acknowledged? And you can think about this in the most broad terms as imagine you are reading an essay and it is reading at maybe like a second grade reading level. It's reading like The Cat in the Hat or Dr. Seuss or something, right? You can infer from that it's probably an essay either geared strictly to younger children or at least to a general audience that's not using a lot of jargon or terminology and isn't expecting the audience to know those terms. However, if you're reading an article and it's about, I don't know, something science-based, and they're throwing a lot of chemistry terms out there at you and referencing other research, other data from years past, you can assume that the writer of that article is relying on the audience having already known all these things, or at least being able to follow along, so you can infer that that was written toward a more academic audience. So that's just one example. And then you can briefly respond to the author's argument. Do you think that the author is making their point effectively? Do you agree or disagree with the author and why? This is important to include just because it shows whether or not the argument is working or whether or not successful, and that is part of the analysis. But don't let that one point become the majority of your essay either. You're not just writing a response to something that the author is saying. The main point of this essay is to analyze what the author is saying. So it's not responding to their argument, it's looking at how they make their argument. And again, 4 to 7 pages long, usual stuff, typed, 12-point double-spaced, Times New Roman, etc. And so, last week, not last week, last time we talked, we went over a couple of different places you could go to find this essay or this article that you're going to choose to start doing this analysis on. Because again, I think that people write best about what they're interested in, so I hesitate to place too restricting of a topic or a theme on this assignment. I want you to be able to find an essay that you like, that you want to work with, and so I'm kind of leaving it up to you to find that. But if you're feeling that that's kind of overwhelming or that you don't know where to go to begin, the last time we met, we did talk about places that you could go to find the essay, the article, or the speech that you want to work on. And so, again, just to recap, some of those places are Google Scholar. We looked at Google Scholar in class, how to navigate it, how to use it to sort of find other articles similar to the ones that you've already looked up. You can also go to the Brookings Library website and access the databases there. We looked at JSTOR and how it's functioning kind of similar to Google Scholar, how you can put in terms in the search bar to find the topics that you want. So go look through those if those seem to be things you want to do. Or you can say, all right, I really liked the topics that I was working with for Projects 1, the narrative, or Projects 2, the media analysis. If you liked what was going on there and you want to keep working with those ideas, with those themes or with those strategies, try to find an article or an essay that relates to those first two projects in some way. So you can sort of use, for example, Project 1, the media analysis, and bounce an idea off that to figure out what you want to do for Project 3. And so there's always that. A third option was speeches. We talked about how if you wanted to analyze a famous speech, ways to do that. We're going to do that today in this lecture, actually. But I do ask that if you're going to do a speech, like either a speech from a politician or a speech from somebody famous in history, that you transcribe the speech first. Make sure that you get it written out on paper so that you can take a step back and see it from a distance, so to speak, and make annotations, highlight passages, maybe break it down into separate segments if you want to. Have it transcribed in writing so that you can play with the speech. And finally, a place that you can go to look for articles or essays, if none of those means are working for you, is the textbook. And we talked about that too in class. The Everyone's an Author textbook. In the very back, they have a lot of good essays, probably about, 200, 300 pages worth of different essays on all sorts of different topics, by good authors too. So most of them would work, I think, for this assignment. A lot of them are, if not argumentative essays, they're at least essays that have a thesis in themselves. They're trying to make a point. So you can look through those and pick one of those essays to work with too. If you can't find any online, none on Google Scholar or in the databases to work with for this project, you can use one of the essays in the back of this book too. Just pick one that seems interesting to you and read it through. And I do ask, I said this in class the other week, but when you pick your essay and you know what you want to work with, make sure that you read it through carefully, make annotations, and really, if you got the time, read it through 2 or even 3 times, because you're going to pick up on things in the second reading or on the third reading that you didn't pick up on the first time around. And since you're going to be working with these texts so closely, analyzing them so minutely, you're definitely going to want to have a good grasp of the writing as a whole. So you're going to want to be able to keep in mind the beginning says this, the end says this. Have a good, sort of blueprint or layout of what that essay looks like in your mind before you even go about starting writing the analysis. Let me get something else pulled up here. Get a drink of coffee. That is something that's kind of cool about this, I guess. Everybody's able to follow along with the lecture either at home or wherever you're at, in some place where you're comfortable, hopefully. And you can have snacks, drinks, coffee. I like the flexibility of this way, and I hope you guys do too. You could even be laying in bed listening to this, although I don't necessarily recommend that, because you can kind of lull yourself to sleep that way. So, I want us to spend today analyzing a text, going by the guidelines in the assignment description and guidelines for our class. So we're going to do sort of a sample analysis here today. And the text that I want to use is one that's actually referenced in the assignment description and guidelines, Mark Antony's funeral oration from the play Julius Caesar, which is by William Shakespeare. Now, if we are actually meeting in class, I'd play you a clip of a production of Julius Caesar where this all actually happens, so you can actually see the actors acting these words out and see the audience reacting to the speech that's happening. But I'll just go ahead and read it through for the purposes of today. Although if you are interested, I do recommend just clicking on YouTube and typing in something like Julius Caesar, Mark Antony's funeral oration, and something will come up and you can watch that. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the story, I'll just really briefly recap what happens. So Julius Caesar is a play that's about Julius Caesar, who was appointed dictator of ancient Rome. And this was something that the Romans would do quite a bit in times of crisis. They would appoint one man who they thought was exceptionally capable of leadership into the role of dictator. And he would take care of whatever the problem was and then relinquish power, and things would go back to running how they normally run. With Julius Caesar, it got to the point where he wasn't relinquishing his power, and people, mostly the people close to him, the Roman senators, other people that were higher up in the Roman government, were starting to become afraid that Caesar would make himself emperor or king. And so the story, it's kind of familiar. A2 Brutus and everything like that. Caesar's friend Brutus and a couple of the other senators, they assassinate Julius Caesar, stab him to death with daggers, and it wasn't a popular move at first. All of the citizens of Rome were kind of ambivalent about the decision, because even though Caesar was sort of becoming power hungry, he was still really popular with the Romans. But at first, after the senators and the assassins explained their actions, they kind of taught the people over to being on their side of things. They're saying Caesar might have been a good guy, but he needed to go because he was doing all these wrong things. And all the Roman citizens were like, yeah, okay, we agree. And so you get to the part in the play where Caesar's funeral is happening, and one of Caesar's close friends, Mark Antony, asks if he can say a few words at the funeral about Caesar. And it's funny because Mark Antony, in the play and in history too, had a reputation for having sort of a silver tongue. He could convince people to do things that they otherwise might not have done if there was somebody who was less persuasive arguing a point. And the assassins knew this, and some of the assassins, like Cassius, he said, no, Mark Antony does not need to be up here speaking about Caesar. This is going to be a disaster. We shouldn't let him talk. But Brutus, who was another assassin, and he's a good guy, and he thought, well, Caesar was Mark Antony's friend, so yeah, we'll let him have this. We'll let him stand up and say a few words. What's the worst that could happen? And so Mark Antony gives this speech, and this is a famous speech. The speech is interpreted by Shakespeare. Remember, this isn't his actual words. This was the playwright a couple thousand years later, William Shakespeare, giving him these words. But it's a famous speech Primarily because it's known for utilizing each of the three rhetorical appeals so well. So we've been talking about the rhetorical appeals a lot. Logos, pathos, ethos. We've looked at individual examples of each of them over the past couple of weeks. And this speech weaves them all together in a really crafty way that, as you'll see, is pretty effective. So in the play, if you want to imagine it, you've got Caesar's body here, you've got the Roman populace over here, there's a whole bunch of people that just sort of showed up to the funeral because it's a public event. And then Mark Antony comes out on stage and he starts talking. And this is what he says. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. So let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus hath told you Caesar was ambitious. If it were so, it was a grievous fault, and grievously hath Caesar answered it. Here, under leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man, so are they all honorable men, come I to speak in Caesar's funeral. He was my friend, faithful and just to me. But Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. He hath brought many captives home to Rome, whose ransoms did the general coffers fill. Did this in Caesar seem ambitious? When that the poor have cried, Caesar hath wept. Ambition should be made of sterner stuff. Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. You all did see that on the Lupercal I thrice presented him a kingly crown, which he did thrice refuse. Was this ambitious? Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and sure, he is an honorable man. I speak not to disprove what Brutus spoke, but here I am to speak what I do know. You all did love him once, not without cause. What cause withholds you then to mourn for him? O judgment, thou art fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason. Bear with me, my heart is in the coffin there with Caesar, and I must pause till it come back to me. And at this point in the speech, he takes the shroud that's covering Caesar's body away from the corpse. And he says, if you have tears, prepare to shed them now. You all do know this mantle. I remember the first time ever Caesar put it on. 'Twas on a summer's evening in his tent. That day he overcame the Nervii. Look, and this place ran Cassius's dagger through. See what a rent the envious Casca made. Through this the well-beloved Brutus stabbed. And as he plucked his cursed steel away, mark how the blood of Caesar followed it, as rushing out of doors, to be resolved if Brutus so unkindly knocked, or no. For Brutus, as you know, was Caesar's angel. Judge, O you gods, how dearly Caesar loved him. This was the most unkindest cut of all. For when the noble Caesar saw him stab, ingratitude, more strong than traitor's arms, quite vanquished him. Then burst his mighty heart, and in his mantle muffling up his face, even at the base of Pompey's statue, which all the while ran blood, great Caesar fell. Oh, what a fall was there, my countrymen! Then I and you and all of us fell down, whilst bloody treason flourished over us. Oh, now you weep, and I perceive you feel the dint of pity. These are gracious drops. Kind souls, what, weep you when you but behold our Caesar's vesture wounded? Look you here is himself, marred as you see, with traitors. Good friends, sweet friends, let me not stir you up to such a sudden flood of mutiny. They that have done this deed are honorable. What private griefs they have, alas, I know not, that made them do it. They are wise and honorable, and will, no doubt, with reasons answer you. I come not, friends, to steal away your hearts. I am no orator, as Brutus is. But as you know me all, a plain, blunt man that love my friend, and that they know full well that gave me public leave to speak of him, for I have neither wit, nor words, nor worth, action nor utterance, nor the power of speech to stir men's blood. I only speak right on. I tell you that which you yourselves do know. Show you sweet Caesar's wounds, poor dumb mouths, and bid them speak for me. But were I Brutus, and Brutus Antony, there was an Antony would ruffle up your spirits and put a tongue in every wound of Caesar that should move the stones of Rome to rise in mutiny. Okay, so thanks for bearing with me there. And what happens in the play is he finishes up the speech. And again, I encourage you to go watch a clip on YouTube of this scene because it's evident then in the scene. As Antony's speaking, he slowly sways the crowd from being on the assassin's side to thinking that this is injustice. So you might imagine that when Antony first steps up, the crowd's kind of grumbling, saying, oh great, here comes Caesar's friend, what's he going to say? And then as he starts speaking, and as he gets to the end of the speech, the people in the audience start nodding to each other and going, yeah, okay, he had a good point. Wait a minute, yeah, that didn't really seem ambitious in Caesar at all. Oh, really? He was that good of a guy? So it goes on and on like that. And then by the end of the speech, Antony has completely turned around the public opinion, both on Caesar and on the assassins themselves. And so after this scene, the public start hunting down the assassins. They're saying, how dare you kill Caesar? He was such a good guy. And the play follows out on that thread until the end of the story. So this was a turning point. The crowd at the beginning didn't like Caesar that much, and by the end, they loved him. They're weeping for him as if he's their own father. And that's because, like I said earlier, this speech is so persuasive. And it's making such an effective use, not just of logos, pathos, and ethos separately, but of a blending of the three. And I want to think about the places in this speech where each of them show up individually. But first, let's think about how we would introduce this speech if this were the text that we had chosen to analyze for this assignment. We do have to give the context, the background info, and so in this instance it would be something to the effect that you are analyzing a speech by a character named Mark Antony in a play called Julius Caesar by the playwright William Shakespeare. And again, assume that your readers or your audience know nothing. Let them know who Shakespeare is. He's a famous playwright. Let them know who Julius Caesar is, that this was a play that was based on an actual historical event and actual historical characters. You want to know all of that, you want to let your readers know all of that. And then once you set things up so that you've introduced the speech, you've introduced the media that it's in, what kind of a speech it is, then you can start analyzing the speech itself. And the analysis of this speech would be pretty much, at least for me, the way I would do it. I would talk mostly about how the rhetorical appeals are put to use here. There's other things you could talk about. You could talk about metaphor and I guess the poetry of the language that's being used. But if you are writing this with an idea towards how to analyze the argument of a thing, which for this class you are, I would focus more on the rhetorical appeals than anything else while I was analyzing this. And so, look at, I'm going to put up the speech here for you guys on the screen, hopefully, if I can manage that. And I want us to first think about the ethos appeal of this speech. And we've talked before about how ethos is an appeal to the credibility or the ethics of the person who's making the speech. But it doesn't just have to be toward that person specifically. It can also be used in a negative sense to tear down the credibility of somebody else. And Mark Antony does this pretty effectively with Brutus. He has this refrain that he repeats throughout, that Brutus is an honorable man, and all the assassins that are with him, they're all honorable men. He does this 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 4 times, maybe more. And every time he does it, he immediately says something that contradicts that statement. So he's sort of being double-tongued here. He's saying, oh, Brutus is honorable. I'm on your side, crowd. You all like Brutus. I like Brutus. He's honorable, even though he says this thing, which, of course, is supposed to plant seeds of doubt in the audience's mind that, oh, maybe he's not very honorable at all. So while at the same time that he sort of pretends to praise Brutus and uplift Brutus, he also denigrates himself. He's doing this sort of masterful work of rhetoric here, persuading his audience so effectively. And then you get to the very end and he says, I'm no orator. I'm no public speaker like Brutus is. You all know me. I'm just a plain, blunt man. I don't have wit, words, worth, nor power of speech to stir men's blood. I'm just speaking what I know. But if I were Brutus, I would really be able to persuade you and get you to believe my side of things, and I would really get an uprising going. So at the same time that he's persuading everybody, he's also saying, I'm not a very persuasive guy. I'm just saying what I think is the truth. That's a good example of sort of two ethos arguments happening at once. And you can imagine them happening as sort of like in the form of an X. While Antony is talking down about himself and praising Brutus, at the same time, he's making himself look better and Brutus look worse. Thinking about the logos appeal of this speech, he brings up a bunch of things from the past that are sort of contradicting what Brutus is saying. So where he says that Brutus said that Caesar was ambitious, but whenever he brought home captives from war, he took all of the booty, all of the battle spoils, and put them into the public treasury. Did that seem ambitious? I presented him with a crown 3 times, and each time he rejected it. Did that seem ambitious? Those are examples of him sort of using logic. He's saying if Caesar was ambitious, if what these assassins say is true, he wouldn't have done this. I don't want to get too far into that because I think I want to let you guys have a chance to sort of pick through this speech as well. So I'll move on and talk about pathos. The pathos appeal, the appeal to the emotions. You can see this really kicking into play when he starts drawing the audience's attention to the body itself. He peels back the shroud and shows them the mantle or the outfit that Caesar was wearing when he got stabbed. He's saying, look, here's where Cassius's dagger came through. Here's where Brutus stabbed. Look at the evidence here. Look at this treachery. Yeah, and then there's a point where he sort of chides the audience for not being as emotional as they should be. Where he says that you all loved him at one point, and there was a good reason for you to love him. Why aren't you mourning for him now? And he says that reason has fled to beasts, because even animals would be more in mourning for this man than you all are. You're just sitting there with hearts made of stone, not really crying, not really shedding tears for him. I actually have to stop speaking at one point, he says, because I have to pause till my heart comes back to me because it's there in the coffin with Caesar. Playing up the emotion. He does the same thing again when he says that it was more ingratitude that Caesar felt toward Brutus than the actual stab itself that killed him, because Brutus was such a good friend of his that when he saw that Brutus was murdering him, his heart just burst because he couldn't take the betrayal from it. Even though, of course, he was stabbed dozens and dozens of times. That's probably what killed him. But it's an effective emotional imagery. And then you can see him making a Kairos-based appeal as well, an appeal to the audience, to the time and the place. At the very beginning, the friends, Romans, countrymen line. He's identifying himself with them, and they're not just a crowd of people, they're Romans. He identifies them as being part of the civilization that's supposed to be, well, civil and a little bit one bar above everyone else. The Romans had a high opinion of themselves, so the fact that they're all Romans should make the murder of Caesar even more unjust, even more horrendous than it really was. And so you can see that all of the rhetorical appeals are being put to use here, but they're not just being used separately. They're being used so that they complement each other and build each other up. And so it's not just one argument that Mark Antony is making to prove that the assassins were wrong to commit that murder, but it's three arguments that are merging into one argument, and that's what makes it such a powerful speech. And I think it's effective, and I would argue, if I were doing an analysis of the speech, that it's effective, mostly by the effects that it had. You can see that it persuaded the audience to come onto Mark Antony's side, even though in the beginning they didn't really like him at all. History tells us that he might have been a not super upstanding sort of guy. That would be my sort of take on the speech that I would give to round off the analysis. So that's an example of how to go about analyzing a text, in this case, a speech from a play. Think about, start looking for your own texts if you haven't found one already. I hope that some of you got at least a little bit of a start on this, but if not, that's okay. You still got time. I sent out in the announcement email that I was going to extend the deadline for this project. So you still have time to start looking around, thinking about what text you want to use to analyze, but definitely start doing that soon. And when you find your text, break it into parts if you need to. Find the portions that look like they're making a logos-based appeal or a pathos appeal, something like that. And then highlight them so that you have those and that you can set them aside for the part in your analysis where you talk about how the author uses logos or pathos. And also look at other things that the author does that seem to be crafty, like the repetition. So like the repetition in this speech where he says Brutus is an honorable man over and over again. We saw before in an analysis of one of the commercials, the Coca-Cola commercial, I think it was, where the guy was talking about how repetition can be a powerful tool because it keeps bringing the audience back to the same point over and over and ties everything in. And get a sense of what the main argument of the essay is or the article is. Having a firm grasp of what the thesis of a piece of writing is really the key that unlocks the door to everything else, because it can be overwhelming, especially if you're analyzing something that's really long, when you just look at all those words, all those paragraphs, and you go, wow, I got to get through all of this. It can definitely feel like a sort of getting lost at sea. Once you know what the thesis is or what the main idea or the theme is, then you have context, and so you can take that sea of paragraphs, that sea of words, and with that context you can fit everything into its proper place, so it doesn't just feel like it's going on and on and on. There's a point to everything, or there should be. Maybe you're reading something that was written poorly and it really is just rambling on, and that's something to make note of too. Speaking of reading things that are too long, again, try not to overwhelm yourself here. Pick an essay or an article or a speech that's manageable. Don't analyze a 500-page book. Definitely don't do that. If you want to analyze a work of fiction, that could work, but pick a specific section. So like this speech is a specific part of the play Julius Caesar. If you wanted to pick a specific scene that you thought was making an argument really well and to look at that specific scene from, like, say, a novel, you could do that, but you would have to firmly establish like where you were beginning and where you were ending. So in chapter 8 of such and such book, this happens. Okay, so that's about all I have to say for this lecture. Hopefully it didn't run too long. I'm going to keep staying in touch with everyone through Blackboard or again through email. If you need to get a hold of me, I'll try to respond as quick as I can. And check out the questions that will be linked to this lecture. And also remember that the Blackboard discussion board posts that have been running since the beginning of the semester, I'm going to keep doing those too. I'm going to post one this Wednesday. So those will be a thing too. Remember to look at those. And yeah, I will see everyone next week. Hopefully this worked out well, and have a good one.